temporary protected status holders, farm workers, essential workers, and their families. We won't rest until a pathway to citizenship is guaranteed and until militarization of immigration policies is ended. At Bend the Arc, we generally open meetings with a kavanah, the Hebrew word for direction or intention. The term refers to concentrating the mind or heart in the performance of a religious act so that it doesn't devolve into rote ritualized action. Tonight, we want our town hall experience to be heartfelt as well. Our kavanah is to take the insights from this meeting and turn them into action, to hold one another and ourselves accountable for working to fix the ills we'll hear about in the next hour. We thank Congressman Bowman for his leadership and vow to act together so that our vision for a more just America for all of us is realized. I am pleased to introduce Congressman Jamal Bowman.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being with us. It's a pleasure to share this space with you and to share some of what I've been learning in Congress around the issue of immigration, but also share what I learned and what I saw on my trip to the border, which was to Laredo, Texas. There are many different border entry points. We decided to go to Laredo. Can I get the next slide, please? Yeah, so I traveled to the border first and foremost because I wanted to see for myself what was happening there and how things were going down there and how people were being treated. For those of you who know me, you know the immigration issue for me is a human rights issue. And you know that my belief is if someone is coming here seeking refuge, seeking asylum, seeking safety, it's our job to provide that safety and asylum to them. I've heard many things about what's happening at the border. Obviously, I didn't go during the Trump administration, where I heard that things were a lot worse than they are now. But I'm still always hearing stories from my Republican colleagues and others around just the dangers and what's happening there. So I went in July, and the first place I was able to visit was a Catholic charity shelter, which is something that I really wanted to see. And this was, I will frame this as the humanity portion of the trip. This is the place where, people are brought in. They are tested for COVID first at the Holding Institute before they are brought to Catholic Charities, where they are checked in. They are provided shelter, they are provided clothing, they are provided food. They are provided a safe place to sleep and rest with their families, and they are, supported as they make their way to additional destinations. The people here were warm, they were amazing, they were informative and friendly, and they were operating pretty much as volunteers from across the country in working in this sort of small building, providing support for our immigrant friends and family. I also want to recognize the Holden Institute and Pastor Mike Smith. As I mentioned, they do COVID testing there, but they also provide a safe space as well for the immigrants that were coming in. But the people in this picture, I believe, were all volunteers working. There was a doctor down there who was a volunteer, and others who were volunteers. So Catholic Charities provided a lot of the humanity, as well as one of the grassroots organizations that we met with down there as well. Next slide. So one of the things that kind of jump out at you when you go down there, so we went to Catholic Charities first, and then we went to the Border Patrol Police Department. And you just see how our money is spent at the border. It's spent on detaining incarceration and deportation much more than is spent on humanitarian efforts. So we always see the number on the page, right? And these numbers here sort of reflect some of that. But to see what it looks like physically and in person was kind of just overwhelming. So the CBP police department that we went to pretty much felt like it took up a whole city block. It was huge. It was state of the art. It looked like it was brand new. And we were greeted by 2 officers, which then swelled to about 20 officers, with 2 camera people taking a whole bunch of pictures. I didn't understand why they greeted us in this way. This was kind of weird. But it felt like, even for me as a member of Congress, it felt like militarization. They brought us into this room and they had like a few images of recent immigrants who had been detained in different holding spaces like hotels and arrested, I guess, in those spaces. And there was a map sort of explaining, like just displaying the border and explaining the different entry points at the border and explaining sort of the geographical space in which they operate. A couple of things that stuck out, when we went to the CBP police station was one, like I said, it was about 15, at least 15 agents who were pretty much giving us the tour and following us around. And that just felt weird. There didn't need to be 15 people there, in my opinion. Another thing that stuck out, the first thing the officer mentioned was the amount of stops that they've made throughout the year. I'm going to mess up the number, but it was in the tens of thousands stops that were made. And I asked how many of those stops turned out to be quote unquote criminal. Now, I put that in quotes because they consider crossing the border to be a criminal act. I didn't ask in that context. I asked in the context of when you put someone in the registry and you looked them up, how many criminals were identified? And they were like around 10%. Now, advocates would say that number is a bit high because criminalization, you can be determined a criminal if you came before, was sent back, and now you come in a second or third time. You would pop up in the system as someone who committed a criminal offense. So that 10% is probably less than that. But my main takeaway was, well, at least 90% of the people they detain are not criminal, other than crossing the border, which again, I would argue is not criminal. So we're spending the majority of our resources on CBP, whereas of the stops that they make, only 10% or less are actually criminal. And most of the resources that are needed are the humanitarian resources. And then the third takeaway was they showed us their cells, right? And first of all, it was very quiet in the precinct. There was not a lot of activity going on. And so they had all of these cells, and one cell was occupied by, I want to say 8 to 10 adult males. So a couple of takeaways there. One, the cell could, so some of you heard my story. I've been in jail cells before personally, and I know they'll put 3 or 4 men in like a 3-by-4 foot cell where like there's no room to breathe or move around, and pretty much people just lay on the ground to just try to sleep past the time until you can get out of there. That's what was happening in this cell. Despite the fact that all the other cells were empty, they packed all of these men into this one cell. And the men were just laying on the ground, no space, just trying to kind of sleep past the time. And what made it even worse is when I asked them if they test for COVID, they said no. So these are men who can possibly be infected with COVID, packed into a cell on top of each other, and they didn't even bat an eye. And I asked them, I was like, couldn't you, there were like 10 cells available. Couldn't you separate the men into the other cells? And the guy was like, I guess we could do that, as if he hadn't even thought of that, which was pretty insane to think about. Yeah, so that was. Oh, and one last thing about the cells. This cell was not much bigger than the average bedroom in the home, and like I said, had eight to nine men. But the capacity, like the capacity written on top of the cell, was probably double that number. So if there were 9 people in there, it was like 20, and there were like cells with capacities of like 30 or 40 or whatever. Obviously, like you can't, like if there were that many people in this place, they would just be standing like right next, like leaning next to each other like sardines. And if you ever see a picture of a slave ship during the Middle Passage, that's how they used to pack them in, like right next to each other like sardines. So despite how much CBP tried to clean it up, it was straight inhumane. Like what I saw just right there with my own eyes, it was pretty startling. We could go to the next slide. Yeah, so some of you may know 1/3 of our constituents were born outside the United States. Thousands have traveled across the border to our district. As a matter of fact, when we were down there was someone from the Bronx, I believe, from our district, detained in Laredo while we were down there, and we were trying to get, not us, but he was trying to get home from Laredo. Once in our district, many newly arrived migrants have trouble accessing supportive services, including mental health support, housing, and counsel. Now, I also want to say this. We met with the Laredo Immigration Alliance, which is one of very few grassroots organizations doing work in Laredo, fighting for immigrant rights. And they help to articulate, many of them have had personal experiences with the immigration system. Their families have had personal experiences. And what we learned is, CBP is not long-term care, it's short-term care. Long-term care is ICE. Now, we weren't able to meet with any ICE officials or see any ICE facilities. But what happens when you go into long-term care with ICE, and ICE isn't supposed to be long-term, to my knowledge, but it becomes that. And people can be in there for several weeks or several months and get lost in the system and become isolated from their family who's in the country. So they told stories of trying to reach, I believe one gentleman told the story of his father trying to reach him via phone call, via mail, going to visit, and wasn't allowed to reach him. And this was basically just standard operating procedure. Once someone is in the ICE facility for X amount of time, they're isolated from the rest of the world. And then when you have the resources to get a lawyer and break through the system, people come up missing within that system, and then no one can find them. So again, this is just inhumanity, system of capture and deportation. And then there was another, we also met with, CBP has different departments. We met with those officers who, I guess, drive around and see if they could pick up immigrants. And then we met with some at the border, the actual bridge border. And the communication was different. The energy was different. The people at the bridge were a lot warmer, more engaging for whatever reason. I don't exactly know why that is. At this point, we were kind of behind schedule, so we had to kind of keep it moving. Next slide, please. Yes, so this question, again, if you know me, you know everything that I do is all about radical love and radical care and holistic care. I've spoken to someone this call about the need to end Title 42. which I agree with. But as we do that, we also have to create the infrastructure rooted in care, which doesn't exist right now, at least at the Laredo border. And that's what I'm really concerned about. What does that look like in agenda rooted in care? Next slide, or is that it? Yes. So, as I just mentioned, increased funding for shelters, supporting asylum seekers, education opportunities, social infrastructure, border communities, and for New York 16 immigrants, ending Title 42. As we just mentioned, Title 42 has been renewed. The Biden administration has kind of botched this somewhat, allowing immigrants to come in at one number, then feeling the pressure, then changing the number, continuing with Title 42. A lot more work needs to be done there. Increasing COVID testing and vaccination capacity at the border to ensure we're keeping asylum seekers and communities they migrate to safe from the virus. This is obviously critical, particularly with the Delta variant. And what I saw in terms of the contrast, that there's no this humane border policy. There's very little investment there, and I didn't get to see FEMA's work with children. Did we just change slides? Okay, that's fine. So we all know about the SIVs for Afghan citizens. We've taken important steps to make that happen, passing the Allies Act, which I co-sponsored, to increase number of visas for Afghan citizens, working with colleagues to expedite safe relocation of SIV applicants, and further stem the visa processing backlog, and supporting temporary protective status designations. I joined legislation advocacy effort with Rev. Velasquez to expand the list of countries where residents experiencing ongoing conflict, environmental disasters, or other extraordinary temporary conditions can seek refuge in the U.S. Next slide. So what I'm hearing now, and again, this stuff is moving quickly. There is a pathway to citizenship included in the reconciliation package, which if that continues to be a part of it, that would be a huge win for us. My advocacy has been around the pathway to citizenship for all 11.4 million undocumented individuals currently living in the United States. The pathway includes $107 billion in funding as part of reconciliation, promising sign, but we got to keep pushing to secure that policy change. And it would provide incredible stability for thousands of constituents and DACA recipients and essential workers, which I know many of you on the call work to support essential workers and undocumented workers here to make sure they were a part of the New York State budget. Next slide. Yeah, so I think we're pretty much, this is some of the other advocacy work I've done. I can share all this with you. I know I'm talking a bit too much and I want to get to the panel and some additional questions. But yeah, we can share all this with you. This is the last slide and we can move on. So thank you all so much. I think it's panel time and then we'll have some questions.
Perfect, thank you. We can have our panelists come on camera. And Esmeralda, feel free to kind of take it away from here, our incredible moderator from Catholic Charities.
Hello and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Good evening. Once again, my name is Esmeralda Oscoy and I'm the Regional Director for Catholic Charities Community Services of the Archdiocese of New York, servicing 10 county areas to include Westchester County. Here at Catholic Charities, we aim to protect and nourish the children, feed the hungry and shelter those that are homeless. We help strengthen and resolve family crises and support those who are physically and emotionally challenged. And of course, to today's topic, to help and welcome and integrate immigrants and refugees. Now, as you've heard today, the impacts of federal policy have a profound effect on our everyday life here locally, from our mental health services to the way that we do our case management, to the way that we present our legal services on the ground in Westchester, in Yonkers, and in this district. Now, in addition today to joining as a participant, I will be moderating this evening's event about how local leaders are working to support our immigrant communities. I'm excited to be joined with such a fantastic panelist who represent our nonprofit, our advocacy, our public sector, and we get different perspectives on this topic. So tonight's panelists are Martha Lopez Hanratty, who is the Director of the Minority and Women-Owned Business Development for Westchester County, as well as the Deputy Mayor of New Rochelle. We have Raquel Batista, who is the Commissioner of New York City's Mayor's Office for Immigrant Affairs. Bianca Guerrero, the Fund Excluded Workers Campaign Coordinator at Make the Road New York. And our panelists will now take some time to spend the first 2 minutes introducing who they are and their work, and explaining one way in which they see federal immigration policy shape their everyday work. Then we'll go ahead into a short discussion about immigration policy before opening up the questions for Q&A and for everybody on the screen. If you have a question, feel free to look at the Q&A box on your Zoom screens. We'll be scanning through those questions. And now I'll go ahead and kick it off to Martha. Martha?
Hi, everyone, and to our Congressman Bowman, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you for looking at all of those issues that are so important to so many of our immigrants here in Westchester County. Wearing my hat as a county employee, I want to make sure that the county executive wants to make sure that people know about all of the programs and services that are available via the county. As you mentioned, the community continues to grow. And here in Westchester, the Latino community has grown tremendously. Just to give you an idea very briefly, in the year 2000, there were 144,124 Latinos. In the year 2017, that number jumped to more than 234,000 people. Now that I look at 2021 and waiting for the numbers to reflect how many are Latino, just alone, not to mention, immigrants from throughout the world, that number continues to grow. So needing services is extremely important. As a deputy mayor for the city of New Rochelle, we also want to make sure that our community knows about the programs and services. And Esmeralda, Catholic Charities has been in the front, like many of the other bilingual, bicultural agencies, working very hard, here in Westchester, such as the Community Resource Center, United Community Center of Westchester, Neighbors Link, Centro Hispano. You are making such a great difference, and I want to thank you all for everything that you do. So I don't want to take more than my 2 minutes, but I will be happy to answer any questions, and I am available at all times so that I can, work with you in anything that you need me to work with.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martha. We'll hit it off with Raquel Bautista.
Hi, good evening. And first, thank you, Congressman Bowman, for inviting me to this panel tonight. I'm really excited to be a part of it, not only because of my position as Commissioner of New York City's Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, but also as a Bronxite and as a resident of Congressional District 16. It really is a privilege to be here with you. So, just a little bit about the work of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in New York City. Of course, Mayor de Blasio is deeply committed to working with and advocating with and on behalf of the immigrant community in New York City. Two of our major programs that we have are Action NYC, which is a collaborative with legal service providers throughout the city, where we have a hotline, and I'll make sure to provide that in the chat, where people can call and find legal services in their immigration case. And then we also have ID NYC, where anyone who is a resident of New York City, regardless of immigration status, is able to apply to get an ID. And I do want to mention, for example, with the Excluded Workers Fund, if you are looking to put together your application for the Excluded Worker Fund and you need an ID NYC, we do have appointments available, and we are working with our leaders at the local level to assist in that process, and you can apply and that will help count towards your application. And then in addition to providing services and programs to immigrant New Yorkers, we also do a lot of work around advocacy and policy with our sister cities throughout the country. And the mayor has taken a leadership role through a collaborative called Cities for New York, where we work with over 150 mayors and county executives to advocate on creating pathways for citizenship. Most recently, we had a call with ICE members asking and talking about the enforcement guidelines and what's going to be happening over the next several months and how that will be impacting New Yorkers and other cities. We've also done a lot of advocacy around issues like DACA and TPS, and we continue to educate the community around different immigration benefits that do become available. And we really want to be that resource to get reliable and safe legal services. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah. I'll hit it off to Bianca.
Hi, sorry about that. I didn't hear you. Hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Guerrero. I'm the campaign coordinator for the Fund Excluded Workers Coalition. That's how I got to know Esmeralda. And I think someone already mentioned Community Resource Center. And there's a couple of other groups in Westchester County that we collaborate with through this coalition. If you're not familiar, the Fund Excluded Workers Coalition is a coalition of 200 organizations across New York State. And an excluded worker is someone who is not eligible for unemployment benefits and federal benefits, most often due to their immigration status. So they'll be excluded from the social programs because of their status as an undocumented person. This is despite contributing to this country's tax base and performing essential work such as domestic care, domestic work, or other care work, construction, and other types of industries. The federal law that exists in this country excludes these workers from the social safety net. So for the past year and change, these workers were left without a dime of government support, completely reliant on charity for their survival during the pandemic. All of this happens while the richest people in our country gained record profits, and the federal government continued to turn a blind eye to the folks who keep our economy running, whether or not they were going to be able to put food on the table, stay in their homes, etc. So this coalition came together in early 2020 to fight for economic justice, namely to fight for a fund that would provide income relief to these essential and excluded workers. They phoned banks, they shut down major bridges across New York State, they rallied in Albany, they rallied outside of the governor's mansion, and we were nimble and unapologetic in our demand and in fighting back thinly veiled anti-immigrant rhetoric from legislators in Westchester County and from the governor himself. In April, immigrant workers and their allies changed history. We won a first in the nation $2.1 billion program that is fully funded and fully run by the state to provide a one-time emergency payment to New Yorkers who did not get the unemployment benefits or other federal benefits. Excluded workers, depending on how much proof they have to demonstrate their work history, will be eligible for either $15,600 or a one-time payment of $3,200. The application just opened this past August 1st. So 2 Sundays ago, and organizations across the state are helping workers apply. I really want to give a shout out to Community Resource Center of Mamaroneck for leading the local regional coalition in Westchester and for doing it so well. And while this program is going to make a difference in people's lives, I do want to note that it is temporary. Workers literally had to go on a hunger strike and stop eating for 23 days because of the federal immigration system and the fact that they are left out of the social safety net. If we do not have immigration reform that I know Congressman Bowman is fighting so hard for, they will continue to be left out of essential benefits. And because they're not included in these social safety net programs, they are forced to fight for alternatives that are often more burdensome and more restrictive than programs that other New Yorkers have access to. That's a little bit about me and the work that I do across the state, and I'll kick it back to Esmeralda.
Thank you so much for those introductory remarks, everyone. Every month, we see new individuals, newcomers, new refugees, new asylum seekers that arrive in District 16. Many are traveling. Oh, I'm sorry. Here is one last panelist that I'd like to introduce. This is Diana Sanchez. She is with the Yonkers Sanctuary Movement. She's an amazing community organizer and co-founder. Diana, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm one of the co-founders of Yonkers Sanctuary Movement. My name's Diana. I am so sorry I'm coming in late. As organizers, unfortunately, right now I have to meet with one of our, we have a case where there was a person who was doing scamming to undocumented folks. So I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be meeting because they've been receiving a lot of mail-in. So if you see me back and forth, I apologize again, but that's the life of an organizer. But yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much, Esmeralda, for introducing me.
And true to form, a community organizer is really the person connected to our community and is listening to all of these things. So back to my question with the remarks, these individuals that are arriving into our district are often asylum seekers. They're traveling from the border. At times they are arriving from all over the world. And in many cases, they're unfortunately filled with trauma. As you heard from Congressman Bowman earlier say and highlight, there's small spaces. You heard the words militant. You heard the words, there's certainly a sense of heightened fear, especially when you think about, different policies from some years ago, and most recently, a feeling like you're being separated. So could you, and now we'll kick it off, but could you speak about how your U.S. border policies and temporary protective status impacted the well-being of our community members in this district? So again, I'll go ahead and start with Bianca. Could you speak to those border policies, Bianca, and how does that affect these individuals that are arriving at our doors?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we've seen as this relates to like the excluded worker program, a lot of folks are forced to leave their home countries without much, right? And then you have these programs that are asking them for foreign passports or for birth certificates, marriage certificates, things that they simply don't have because of how transient their lives have been as a result of our immigration policy and our foreign policy as well, right? There are certain communities, particularly across the state, the Guatemalan community, that because their local or their countries of origins do not have the best functioning government at this point in time, they are forced into this limbo space where they don't really have the identity or residency documents that they'll need to apply for these state programs that we've established, and there's no solution for them, right? So I think that's what comes to mind for this question, and I'm happy to kick it off to anyone else who would like to address this.
Raquel or Martha, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, hi. So during COVID, one of the biggest issues that I have seen is that the undocumented community has been hurt the most. Why? Because we have so many workers that are day laborers, housekeepers, babysitters, and when everything shut down, what happened to them? No income, no services, no programs. So what we have been doing is working with everyone who is here present in this panel, making sure that they do get some of the services. That, the excluded workers are extremely important to our economy. I remember maybe 35 years ago, 40 years ago, where we had ghost cities, New Rochelle, Portchester, and now you walk there, we have, the economy has been brought up by whom? By those immigrants who have done so much for us, and leaving them behind is not the American way. So we need to absolutely get that path to citizenship. That's why forums such as this one is so important, because we bring so much to the table that needs to be attended to.
Thank you so much, Martha. Raquel, did you want to weigh in? Go ahead.
Yes. So I just wanted to mention the redesignations for TPS. And right now, currently, people from the countries of Haiti, Syria, Somalia, and Yemen can all start applying for TPS. And so this is why it's important that if you are from those particular countries, that you get the legal help that you need. And so for those who live in New York City specifically, please contact our action hotline, and then we can put you through to attorneys and to legal help to assist you in your case. Other designations include Venezuela and Burma. And most recently, there's a DED for Hong Kong. So there are several things that are happening right now. And of course, sadly, with DACA, right now, there's no more new applications being accepted. And yes, this is where the question of where we really need a pathway to citizenship, and really looking towards the leadership of like the Congressman and others to really move on making a change to the immigration laws so that we're able to put folks onto a path of citizenship and not be up to all these different decisions that are coming out of the various different federal courts.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Three numbers really stand out to me at Catholic Charities. We run the New York State Immigration Hotline. And, last year alone, 87,000 calls came in for immigration support and assistance. 30,000 immigrants were assisted, and 14,000 unaccompanied children and adults were given immigration legal counsel. So thank you so much for all your work and participation. But this is the work that you're seeing and the calls, and those numbers are just, they're huge. We're one of many agencies doing this work. So those are just our numbers for perspective. Now, let's move on to the Q&A next. We have an audience question here. The question came in about a constituent about housing issues for immigrants. How do issues of affordable housing and housing rights impact immigrant communities in this district? Who would like to start off? Diana?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I currently work in a low housing building. We cover 350 units. It's one of the few buildings here in the city of Yonkers. Unfortunately, we do not accept undocumented folks into the programs. And that's a big issue, right? Because I've been also seeing the applications. I deal with applications, putting them into the system. And it's clearly one of the questions. In order to qualify, you have to be a U.S. citizen. A lot of people think that, they are able to do it. But unfortunately, as of now, we do not have anything open for undocumented folks to join into low house income buildings. And I've been obviously a strong advocate of changing that policy. I mean, we've been fighting even in Yonkers to make it more affordable housing for the new constructions buildings. But again, undocumented folks have always stayed out of that, to be incorporated, because we're really bad when it comes to low housing. So unless you are documented a U.S. Citizen, then you're able to qualify. And as of now, we wish we could change this. And it's a conversation that has to keep going, right? It has to be adjusted, because it doesn't benefit nobody, honestly, when it comes to undocumented folks being included in low house system. We see the majority of population here in Yonkers. It's a lot of undocumented folks. We do have a lot of people who have children too, and unfortunately, they are not getting benefit in that. So, and that's my experience recently, that I've been working on one of the, you could say one of the only buildings here in Yonkers that are over 350 units. Thank you.
I just want to mention that the Hudson Valley Justice Center does help undocumented people. So it is important that people know that also with ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program right now is helping undocumented people as well. There are many agencies, and I want to give a shout out to Mount Vernon United Tenants, who is working very hard, making sure that people know about the assistance that is being provided.
Thank you for highlighting, Martha. That is a really much needed resource, and as many individuals as can should apply. Bianca?
Yeah, I just wanted to, similar to what Diana had mentioned, right? there's a lot of times where workers are undocumented workers are completely excluded. And you see this in Westchester, you see this in New York City, you see it across the state where, you know, people don't have a social security number, they can't get a job that's on the books, right? So they're forced off the books, they're paid in cash. If you don't have a social security number or some sort of other form of identification like that, it's very hard to get a bank account or a credit card, right? So getting a lease, getting enough money to put down for a security deposit, getting enough money to do it, or like getting a credit check so that someone takes you on as a tenant is really, really difficult, right? So then what happens next? You're forced to rent out a room, you're forced to rent out a basement apartment or something else. Substandard housing usually that is not regulated, that is not really stable because you're just putting together usually like a handwritten lease with somebody who owns the actual home. You're not put on the utility bills, and you're not building any wealth because you're playing into this rental system, right? And you're limited because of your immigration status to these venues, right? So all of these things, particularly for the excluded worker fund, when people are asked to prove that they lived in New York State, it's like, well, I don't have a lease. I'm not on the utility bill payments. I don't have health insurance. So like I usually avoid going to like the doctor or going to a medical facility. I don't have any records there. It forces people into the shadows and puts them in a position with no other options where they're left in extremely vulnerable situations even more at like the whims of people in private housing and bad actors, sort of the scammers that Deanna had mentioned before. There are all of these things that if you are a citizen or if you have some sort of status you don't think twice about, that undocumented folks have to navigate every single day. And it is a direct result of the lack of federal action on this issue.
Thank you so much for that, Bianca. And that is so true to date. You know, we're hearing about a lot of application assistance not coming through because individuals don't have the documents to apply for ERAP. Our next question here is from Jennifer in the Bronx.
Before you go,
yes,
just one quick thing I want to mention. So the good news is undocumented immigrants are eligible for the American Rescue Plan rent relief money. So that is excellent. The bad news is the governor's office has only disseminated about 1% of that money. So the federal government passed rent relief, I believe $42 billion across the country. Money is there at the state level. The next point of pressure and leverage on the state is to make sure that money is disseminated as quickly and efficiently as possible. I don't know what the holdup is, but this should have been happening already. So we really continue to put pressure on to make sure that rent eliminated, and the eviction moratorium that we have, that should be extended until the money is fully disseminated so that people can stay in their home.
Thank you so much. And yes, as one of the agencies working on this ERAP program, I certainly understand, see the challenges, and would like to see the money executed to all of these individuals that have applied already. So definitely with you on that advocacy point, Congressman. Now back to the question of Jennifer from the Bronx. A question for Congressman Bowman. Well, here we go. Climate change and radical justice come together in so many ways, as does immigration cases, with many climate refugees fleeing their countries and seeking better conditions in the US. Climate change is now what's driving mass movement in human beings across the world. Could you please speak to the intersection of climate and immigration and racial justice?
Well, it's climate, immigration, racial justice, and foreign policy. And it's our foreign policy in many parts of the world that's contributing to climate change at a rapid rate. But it's also our foreign policy, particularly the time we have spent in Central and South America, disrupting political economies in those spaces, that has also contributed to some of the mass migrations we're seeing into America. I believe Mexico also is suing our country because of the import of guns from our country. There's been stories about us sending quote unquote gang members back to these foreign countries to be disruptive in that way in terms of violence. So the intersection, this is all holistic, right? Our foreign policy overlaps with our immigration policy, and what we've done in terms of climate from a military perspective, as well as other perspectives, has led to many of the mass migrations we see as well. So it's all interconnected, and it's all part of an American story that we don't often talk about in an honest way. And part of my job is to tell this honest story as comprehensively as possible, because it's this story that I think shifts the consciousness of people in this country to demand more and better from their government. You know, the only story, or the main story, particularly told by Republicans, is, you know, we have these migrants coming here and they need to stay in their own country and we shouldn't, you know, open our borders to them. That's where the story starts and ends when it comes to Republicans and even some on the Democratic side. But we have to tell the full story, which includes foreign policy, includes racial justice, and includes climate change. And the racial justice piece is interesting also because immigrants from certain darker countries are excluded and treated a certain way compared to immigrants from other countries.
Thank you so much for addressing that. And definitely we want to hear more as you sort of develop and tell more of this history to our constituents in this district area. One last question. This question is from Ruth and to the panelists and the, you know, when it comes, what is the best way that congressional and state level advocates right now can help support undocumented New Yorkers and immigrants at the border? Raquel?
Hi. So I think, you know, as I mentioned before, the mayor has taken leadership with other mayors from around the country to really talk about the issues of immigration and creating pathways to citizenship from a city's perspective. I think, you know, at the city level, as we're talking, right, usually it's the city, and especially in New York City, where we step up and really try to offer a variety of programs and services to communities who fall into poverty or other very vulnerable situations because of their immigration status. And, you know, I just also wanted to add on the housing piece for New York City. New York City residents can go to housingconnect.nyc.gov to find information on housing, regardless of immigration status, regardless of, you know, a variety of issues. And if people do find themselves being discriminated against, they can call, of course, 311 to file a report. And there's also a program within HRA where they work with the Office of Civil Justice, where we partner up with nonprofits throughout the city to assist tenants if they're facing eviction or other issues, whether it's because of immigration status or other issues that may be impacting them. But I think that, yes, this is the time for us to really come together at the city, at the state, and at the federal level to really advocate on behalf of the immigrant community. I mean, all I can say is this is the time, right? This is what we fought for this moment. And of course, you know, with the leadership of the Congressman and, you know, working together, I think that, you know, we can achieve something, but the pressure, of course, needs to get put on.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. Within the county, we have the Office for Immigrant Affairs. We serve as the bridge that makes the connection between the programs and services available and the government, the county government. We want people to know that, you know, they should not be afraid to contact us. We are going out to the different communities. We are working in collaboration with all of our elected officials. We need to get the word out. As I mentioned before, the number of people living in Westchester County, just Latino alone, is huge. So we need to make sure that our schools know how to get the services to the kids. We want to make sure that the families know that we are there, that we have the Human Rights Commission. We want to hear from everyone, but absolutely it is a team that needs to come together, and we have been doing it. And that is why programs such as this one is extremely important. So I hope that we can continue our conversation and making sure that people know about all of those programs and services.
Thank you so much.
Can I just hop in for a little bit? Because I do want to talk about migration in general and the border. There's a big, and we have to be realistic, there's a big problem happening right now with the border and also with our community, right? Like, how are we getting help? With YSM, one thing that we started to do is like we started to get a lot of calls from people who were in the border and trying to get attorneys. Like in the past, basically we had cases where they had come as juvenile and they were trying to get just attorneys. Attorneys, and let's be realistic, attorneys are very hard to get, to hire when they're over there in the border. They usually run from 5 to 10 grand. So whenever we start talking about how can we help, we have to be realistic that as much as we want to help, there's still a gap in financials. One case that we did, it was one juvenile that came, and we literally paid like $5,000 for the attorney, and that was just at the beginning. Then the problem was that when she was having court, she got transferred to another state, and this is what they do a lot in the States, right? They transfer them from one state to another. And then they had court in Puerto Rico. So now you have an attorney trying to hire an attorney that is going to be able to represent not only in the US or in the state, let's say Louisiana, and you're trying to actually fight the case from New York. But then you also have to get an attorney in Puerto Rico to represent them. So we have to see this like it's a big problem. And a lot of problem comes with incarceration itself, right? How are we making it easier for folks who are incarcerated in the border to get proper like help, proper attorneys? It's very hard. And realistically, I think we have to start talking about that. The whole transporting from one person to another to a jail facility, and how that makes it even harder on even the community that are from here to New York and have family members in the border. We have cases where they've been already deported and the parents are coming back, and they're trying to come back because they have their children. But again, we know that right now the border is not open. We know that they're still denying the cases. They're not letting anyone fight for the cases. So it is a crisis that's happening in the border, and we need to address it, right?
Right. Congressman?
Yeah, agree with everything that was just said. In my opening remarks, I addressed many of the things that I saw at the border. And to your point about finances, right? It's a clear contrast between how much we invest in human rights at the border, which is very little, and humanity, and how much we invest in police and the carceral system at the border, which is a tremendous amount of money. Couple things I wanted to just flag. Attorneys were mentioned. So in the new appropriations bill, an additional $50 million was added to the Department of Justice to fund for pro bono attorneys coming out of the House. Now, hopefully that remains in the Senate, and it's more likely to remain if we continue to advocate to Chuck Schumer and others to fight to have that amount of money remain. And that speaks directly to the advocacy that's been going on, and that is a victory there. 50 million is not 500 million, but it's a start, and we keep fighting. The second thing I wanted to mention is, a pathway to citizenship as part of the reconciliation package is currently in the bill, north of 120 billion, I believe was the number. So again, that's another big win because of the advocacy of everyone on this call. And, we got to keep organizing, keep fighting, and keep grinding. But I just wanted to mention those 2 points.
Thank you so much. And as we continue to be New York and welcome all of our immigrants, and one of the things that I think we often try to do at Catholic Charities is make sure that we are advocating at every point. Bianca here as an activist, and participating always at the front, making sure that individuals, if you're out there, if you want to be part of this work, it's very easy. Contact any of our agencies. We're all here. Your input, your feedback, and your body is needed to represent us on the ground when it comes to the Green Light Bill, the Fund for Excluded Workers. There's a lot of energy out there for New York State, and these issues do directly impact those that we live next to, our neighbors. So with that said, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Ruthie to make an announcement, but thank you all. And thank you, Congressman Bowman. It's a pleasure to work with you and be here.
Can I just say something, Esmeralda? I'm sorry,
ahead, Diana.
but I did see a
Good morning.
question over there that it said, how are we reaching Black immigrants for all the bills? And I think it's important to talk about it. And I'm gonna be real. We've had a big disconnect, just in the whole, like you could say, nation of reaching to Black undocumented folks. And I feel like it's important. Like when we started with YSM, it was DACA recipients and it was people who were being affected that started this whole organization. So one thing that I could suggest, we've been trying, obviously on our page, we try to do everything in bilingual Spanish and English, right? So we want to make sure that we don't only address to Spanish speakers, but also English speakers, but we do need help. And one thing that I do recommend of people who are here in this goal, like join a movement, join organizations. Sometimes we do need support, like us, we're grassroots. So we always need help in volunteering and trying to get to more communities. And obviously, as you guys know, many of us are like, if we have staff, we only have 1 or 2 staff, because again, we are trying to survive, right, in this whole world. But it's definitely important that we start reaching out to the Black undocumented folks. So I don't want to dismiss that question too. And, and obviously the more we do, the more we support more communities. If you ever want to invite us to go and speak to a certain community, a certain group, church, any affiliation, anything, like we're down to it. Even we're down to, like we've been doing Zumba, even Zumba classes, like all grassroots. So if you ever want to join, let us know, because I think we're all more than happy to help you and support any community that comes.
Thank you, Diana.
Very briefly, Diana, thank you so much for making that point. It is extremely, extremely important. We have so many people from different countries from Africa. We have, a great community from Haiti, and we need to reach out to all of the different groups. So Diana, I'm gonna be calling you so that we can work together on this.
Thank you so much, Martha. Now we gotta wrap it up. So we're headed over to Ruthie.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all so much for this incredible panel, for making the time. Thank you to all of our participants. As Diana said, there were tons of excellent questions coming in that we didn't get a chance to answer. So our office will work to communicate, any answers that we can over the next few weeks. And we also just want to make sure that everyone knows that our office can do federal immigration casework, assist people with anything that they need related to, checking in on visa status applications, asylum cases, special immigrant visas. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and I will put our phone number in the chat right now. But over to Congressman Bowman to close us out.
Yes, peace and love, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. The work continues. We will all stay in communication with each other to continue to work and address not just the questions, but what immigration work looks like going forward. I just wanted to give a big shout out to my staff member, Ruthie. I always forget their titles because they got a million of them, but she has an awesome title with our office. I think policy advisor. Tell me what it is, Ruthie. What policy advisor? Yes. Ruthie is our policy advisor. She is awesome. She put this whole thing together. She came with me to the border. Just want to give her a shout out, and a shout out to Malia in the background doing the slides and everything else we're doing. So good night, everyone. Thank you all for being with us.
Good night, everyone.